Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Combs, and I want to talk in this video about argument. We will be writing 4 major essays in this class, and they will each be arguments. They will be argumentative in nature. So it makes sense to first talk about what an argument is. And before we move on, let me just say that I think that PowerPoints that just throw information um, up are sort of boring. So I like to theme all of the PowerPoints I use. And the theme of this PowerPoint presentation that I'm using in this video is the Muppets. So the Muppets will be throughout this PowerPoint presentation, and other PowerPoint presentations that I use in videos and in this class will have themes as well. I just like that sort of thing. So enjoy the themes because they're here anyway. But let's get back to argument. So we're going to be writing arguments. So we need to know what an argument means in the academic community. And I'm sure that you've used the word argument before in your daily life. We think about arguments as heated exchanges, maybe debates where there's yelling, perhaps. People are angry. We usually think of people being angry when they argue. So you can argue with your spouse or your partner. You can argue with your supervisor. If you're the supervisor, you can argue with employees. You can argue with your siblings or your parents or your children, right? With a friend, and we usually think in our lives of arguments being very passionate, right? And like I said before, even angry most of the time. But in the academic community, in college, the word argument means something a little bit different. It's more formal, less yelling, hopefully. You will still passionately defend your point of view, but we're going to do it in a much more calm and formal way. So let's talk about some definitions of argument. As a college student, you will be asked to write essays in several of your classes, and this class will help prepare you to be a writer in the college setting. And often, academic writing is argumentative in nature, but what does that really mean? And there are several definitions for argument, but I like these two the best, and I think the second one sort of comes out of the first one. So we can say that an argument is a spoken, written, or visual text that expresses a point of view. And we're going to call anything that we can read, watch, look at, or listen to a text. So a text is an essay or a story or a novel or a piece of art or a movie or an advertisement or a commercial or a YouTube video, right? So anything that we can sort of take in by reading, by watching, by viewing, by listening, we're going to call a text. So an argument is simply a spoken, written, or visual text that expresses a point of view. So the key here is expresses a point of view. So an argument is anything that has a particular point of view. So for example, let's say I wanted to write an argument about video games. Well, I wouldn't just pick up my pencil or start typing and just start typing everything I know about video games. That would not be an argument. An argument would have a particular point of view, something you believe about video games that you want to say to your reader. So, for example, I might say, violent video games are actually good for kids. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that or not, but that is an argument that you could write or present to someone because it has a point of view. It's not just everything that you want to know about video games. It's video games, violent video games are actually good for kids. We've been told maybe that they're bad for kids. We shouldn't let kids of a certain age play violent video games, but I'm here to tell you that actually it's okay. It's actually better for students or kids to play violent video games. All right. Now, whether you believe that or not, that is something that is appropriate. That's a topic that is appropriate for an argument because it expresses a particular point of view, not just here's a bunch of information about video games. Now, the second definition, I think, flows from that because if you have an argument, then you need to have proof that your argument is true. So, a second definition we can use for argument is the use of evidence and reason to discover some version of the truth. So, if my argument is that violent video games are good for kids, I need to have reasons and evidence and proof to prove that my argument is true, to prove that my point of view is true. So, just the statement is not enough. The argument actually needs the evidence and the reasons to back it up. And here we say discover some version of the truth because your goal is to get your audience or your readers to agree with you. That's difficult to do, especially if you're writing about something controversial. It's hard to get people to change their beliefs about religion, for example. It's hard to get people to change their views about topics like abortion or marriage equality. People are sort of, they have the way they feel about those things, and not a lot is going to change that. And when you argue, sometimes your goal is to change the reader's mind or call the readers to action. When you argue to persuade, which we'll talk about in a few moments, that is your goal. That's hard to do, and you don't often achieve that goal. But it's good enough when arguing if you get your reader to consider your view as valid. So I might say, after reading an argument titled Violent Video Games Are Good for Kids, I might say, well, I'm not going to let my kids play violent video games, but I understand where the writer's coming from. I understand the points that writer makes. All right? That goes a long way in an argument. And sometimes in an argument, that's as good as you're going to get. You're not going to change the reader's mind, but you might get the reader to accept your version of the truth, even if they do not fully agree with it as their truth. I hope that makes sense. And if that doesn't, we can ask questions about it, maybe discuss it in the discussion board. So Kerzner and Mandel are the authors, those are their last names, of Practical Argument, which is a textbook that is used for classes where we talk about argument. I've drawn a lot from that textbook. I didn't want to have you all purchase a textbook. I wanted to put together some resources for you. But if I had a textbook in this class, it would probably be that one. That one's a good one. So if you want to find a copy of it, it's not required, of course, but it might be a good resource for you. But they say that an argument takes a stand and presents evidence that helps to convince people to accept the writer's position. Keep in mind that arguments make statements with which reasonable people may disagree. So your goal in arguing should be to get your reader to accept your point of view as valid. Even if they don't change their mind and believe as you believe, your goal should be to get them to consider your point of view as a valid one. Okay? So the main thing you want to know about arguments is that arguments are texts that express a particular point of view, and they back that point of view up with evidence and reasons, okay? And your goal is to get, if not to get your reader to change their mind, to get them to accept your point of view as a valid one. Okay, so those are the things that you want to, the main things you want to understand about argument. Now, we have something called the rhetorical triangle, and when we talk about rhetoric, and rhetoric is basically Rhetoric, it's that first part of rhetorical. And rhetoric just means the study of speaking and writing, the study of arguing, basically. So the rhetorical triangle takes the elements of argument, the topic, the purpose, the audience, the context, and even you as the writer or speaker, and shows how they work together. As the triangle suggests, the rhetorical situation is a dynamic one. Each element affects and is affected by every other element. So in an argument, you have a topic or message, so that's your point of view, and that topic or message will have a certain purpose. You have an audience, the people that you're writing for, and you have you, the writer and speaker. And the audience and the speaker are both in a certain context. And the context for writing is the set of social, historical, and cultural circumstances surrounding the topic or message. So if you think about context, you as the writer have a certain context that you're writing in, and the audience has a certain context that they're reading in. So for example, let's say that you want to argue some topic or some message about the rights of African Americans in this country. If you're writing about that topic today in 2021, then you must refer to the Black Lives Matter movement, because that is a movement that that affects that conversation. Whatever your topic is, Black Lives Matter will probably inform that, because that is a movement that is prominent today, and a lot of people are discussing it. So if you're writing about African American rights and you do not reference Black Lives Matter, then your audience may think that you don't know what you're talking about, because that is something that is being discussed. It's a movement that is ongoing. And that's not the case 3 or 4 years ago. You would not have had to reference Black Lives Matter, because it wasn't, even though there were people who were saying that Black Lives Matter then, it wasn't the movement that it is today. So always pay attention to your context. And the reason why is because you want to seem like you are informed about the topic. And if you do not refer to things that are going on currently that are connected to that topic, you might seem like you are not informed, and you'll lose your credibility. Okay? So your topic or message will have a certain purpose. And there are more purposes of argument than, these three. But these are the purposes that are most, I think, related to academic arguments in college classes. So your purpose for arguing could be to inform. And when you're arguing to inform, what you're doing is telling readers something they do not know. You're giving them needed information. Now, we will be writing our first essay as an argument to inform. And don't worry, I'll take you through some pre-writing steps to help us find a topic and narrow a topic and all of that. So we'll work on that later. But just now know that arguing to inform is a purpose that an argument can have. So, for example, have you all ever used the website Rotten Tomatoes? So Rotten Tomatoes, if you don't know, RottenTomatoes.com, all one word, is a site where they will list movies that are in theaters and shows that are on television, and they will give you all a summary of all of the reviews of that film, for example, or TV show, and then they'll link to each of the reviews. And then they also will tell you how the general public, not necessarily reviewers, but moviegoers, how they have rated the movie. So Rotten Tomatoes, the staff at Rotten Tomatoes, it's not their goal to persuade you to watch one movie over the other. Now, some of the reviews, that is the goal of some of the reviewers that they reference, but Rotten Tomatoes itself, their purpose is not to persuade you to see certain movies. Their purpose is to give you information about movies so that you can make a decision for yourself. So Rotten Tomatoes is a site that argues to inform, okay? So they are arguing because they're having a certain point of view about a movie. They give movies a percentage, right? And I think if you're like, somewhere over, somewhere in the mid 60s up, then they will say that that is a movie that you should go and see, or that is a movie that the critics say you should go and see. So they do have, that site does have certain points of view, but the staff of Rotten Tomatoes is not saying one movie, you should go see one movie over the other. They're just telling you what critics have said so you can make an informed decision yourself, okay? So that's arguing to inform. You could also argue to persuade, and when you argue to persuade, you are convincing readers to change their views and possibly even calling them to action. So the college HCTC argues to persuade all the time because all of our marketing is trying to get students to come to our college. So we'll talk about how it's very affordable to come to HCTC. We'll talk about how we have instructors who are knowledgeable. We have programs that will help you get jobs. All of those things are not just there to inform you. They are there to inform you, but they're also there to persuade you to come to our college, to enroll. And that's an action, right? You're not just going to sit and say, oh, okay, well, HCTC is a good college. That's not enough. Our marketing is designed to cause you to enroll in our college. So that would be arguing to persuade. So another example might be if I wanted you to donate to the World Wildlife Fund, I might create a pamphlet or a presentation or a video that will give you all of the reasons why you need to donate to this charity versus other charities. All right. And that would be a call to action. I'm asking you to give your money to a certain organization. That is a call to action. So that is an argument to persuade. And then you can also argue to explore and to make decisions. And when you do that, you identify issues and propose solutions. So, for example, I might say, maybe in a letter to the editor or in a opinion piece in the newspaper, I might say that teenage crime is a problem in our community. I'm not saying it is a problem in our community, but I'm just saying that's an example. So teenage crime is a problem in our community. What can we do about it? And then I might propose that if we had some activities for teenagers to do in our community, then they wouldn't be so bored, and that might reduce the teenage crime, right? So in that argument, I'm exploring, making decisions, I'm identifying issues. I identify the issue of teenage crime. And so, as part of that definition that we talked about earlier, I would need to list some examples of particular crimes, list some examples of how teenagers are committing crimes. And then when I propose my solution, I would have to convince, I don't know, the city council that we need more entertainment avenues for teenagers. So I might refer to places where there had been teenage crime, and when they when that community put in a skate park, for example, then crime went down, right? So I would have to use reasons and evidence to support my point of view. And then the audience is also an important part of the rhetorical triangle. You need to write, when you write or when you create any text, you're doing that for a certain audience. So arguments engage audiences. Anytime you write, you are writing for a certain audience. And I will probably, when we form statements about what we're writing about, I will probably ask you to identify your role as the writer. Why should you write about this topic? What connection do you have to it? And I'll also ask you to identify the audience you are writing for, because that will affect how you write and what type of argument you write. So, as you are writing, keep in mind the following traits of your audience, because based on where your audience, or based on the traits of your audience, your argument will be different. So, for example, age. You need to consider age. If you are writing about juvenile diabetes, and you're writing about juvenile diabetes to a 10-year-old who has just been diagnosed as having juvenile diabetes, then you're going to use different language than if you were writing to a group of doctors who were studying that, right? So age is important. Gender is important. Writing to men is, you might use different examples, different reasons, different language if you're writing with men in mind as your audience than if you're writing with women in mind. You also should consider their interests. You also should consider the socioeconomic situation. That's basically how much money they have. Are they wealthy? Are they middle class? Are they lower class? Their life roles. Are they parents? Are they teachers? Are they doctors? Are they siblings? What are their values? Are they very religious people? Are they people who don't believe in God, right? Are they atheists? You would write about certain topics differently than to someone who believes in a religion than you would to someone who does not believe. You would write differently about some topics to Christians than you would to Muslims, right? And consider education level, all right? And so you need to keep all of these things in mind, because you want to work to ensure your intended audience, which is the audience that you think you're writing to, you want to make sure that that matches your indicated audience, which is the one that is evoked in the writing. So if you think that you're writing about juvenile diabetes to a 10-year-old, and you use all of these technical terms that they will not understand, well, you probably do not have are not very aware of your audience, right? So you might need to make some changes, because you may not convince the 10-year-old that they need to eat differently or exercise more, because they will not understand your argument if you don't tailor the argument to them, okay? So the rhetorical triangle, and we'll come back to this, but it everything relates together, and all of these things sort of work together to create the rhetorical triangle. And again, if you have any questions about any of this, just let me know. So Kersner and Mandel, again, they have a lot of good stuff in their text, says arguments are everywhere. Whenever you turn on the television, read a newspaper or magazine, talk to friends and family, enter an online discussion, or engage in a debate in one of your classes, you encounter argument. So here are just some examples of different arguments from life. So a lawyer persuading a jury that his or her client is innocent. That is an argument. A doctor convincing his or her patient to undergo a certain treatment. That is an argument. An instructor conferencing with a student about better study habits. The instructor is arguing that the student needs to use these study habits to help them do better in class, I guess, right? That's an argument. A commercial for a certain brand of dishwashing liquid, an applicant filling out a job application. When you fill out a job application, you're saying, I'm a good candidate. Possibly I'm the best candidate for this job. So those are all examples of arguments. And in fact, Lunsford and Ruskiewicz, which I never know how to pronounce names, so I've probably butchered that. They have published a book. This is another textbook that I like, but their book is called Everything's an Argument. But does this make sense? Is everything an argument? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some things, show you some pictures of items, and I want you to explain how these can be seen as an argument. So what I would like for you to do is in your journal, I've asked you to have a journal for this class. It could be any kind of notebook. But I want you to, for each of these, I want you to identify possible topics or messages that each are conveying, who the speaker or writer is for each of these, what purposes, what audience, and what context exists for each of these. And we'll look at the first one together. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you just write about each of the other items that I have listed here. I mean, I'm not going to see most of this because you know, I'm not going to be looking at everyone's journal. This is for you, but I really want you to spend some time doing this. And maybe if you take 5 to 10 minutes to write about and think deeply about each of these different arguments, it may help you to sort of figure out and just sort of have some ideas about arguments. Okay, so some of these are not going to be as easy to see how they are arguments. You're going to have to do some thinking, but that's okay. That's what classes are for, right? That's what this class is partly for, because we want to be able to not only write arguments but analyze them as well. So let's look at this first one together, and then I'll let you work on the others. And what I'll probably do is ask you to type in some information. Probably not everything that you write, but just to know that you have gone through this exercise. With each of these, I'll ask you to just type a little something in before you move on. But really, spend some time thinking about each of these different arguments. And if you have any questions, just let me know. So let's look at the first one. So this is the parental advisory explicit content label. And most of the time we see this on CDs or albums. So how is this an argument? Okay. So what is the possible topic or message here? Okay. So when I see this, what I see is that this is a message that says to parents, you may not want your children listening to or being exposed to the content in this CD, right? That is the message that it sends. And as far as who the speaker or writer is, whoever is, I know these are on labels at certain retail stores like Walmart or Target, maybe. I don't know if Target actually puts them on there, but that may be the speaker, because they might be thinking that, well, parents will probably come here and purchase CDs, although we don't really do CDs a lot nowadays. This might be an old example that I need to change. But we've really moved on from that, and we're using like Spotify and iTunes and other things. But but the speaker or the writer might be Walmart, for example, because they might think, well, if we let parents know that we're watching out, we're helping you to watch out for what your kids listen to, that they will come there and purchase those, right? Um, Another writer or speaker might be the Parents Music Resource Center, which was founded in 1985. And they're actually where these parental advisory explicit content labels come from. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But here's another message that this has, and I know that this was a message for me as a teenager. When I would go and choose a CD, I would look for when I was a teen, I would look for the things that said parental advisory because I thought, well, if my parents don't want me listening to this, then it must be some good stuff. It must be some naughty stuff that I'm going to enjoy. You know what I mean? So a message that the PMRC and that department stores don't didn't think of might be that if they put this label on CDs, that would ensure that teens would want to purchase that CD because that's the good stuff. If it's stuff my parents don't want me to have, it must be the good stuff, right? So that might be a message that is conveyed that was an unexpected message. Okay. The audience, of course, I think would be parents. But an unexpected audience is teens because maybe teens look for this and they think, yeah, that's the music I want. I know I did, at least. Um, and then context. So if I want to talk about this, if I'm going to argue something about this, I need to make reference to the Parents Music Resource Center, which was co-founded in 1985 by Tipper Gore, who was the wife of Congressman and later Vice President Al Gore. And she worked to get music, in particular music that had explicit lyrics, what we would consider curse words, and controversial ideas about women and about minorities. She worked to get that music labeled as explicit. And there was a big controversy about it. They had hearings. Lots of music, people from the music industry, musicians spoke. A lot of people saw this as a form of censorship. So if I were going to write about this, I would need to refer to that, or I would seem like I'm not informed about what has gone on before. Okay, so we've talked about possible topics, messages, speakers and writers, purposes, audiences, and the context. So that's the idea, and really, I'm hoping that you will go into, as you're writing and responding to these, I'm hoping that you will go into more depth than we did with the parental advisory explicit content. Okay, so let me show you each of these, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you, before you move on, write about each of the topics, messages, speakers, purposes, audiences. Write about all of that. Think about all of that. But I'll just ask you some pointed questions about each of these before you move on, so that we don't spend 4 hours interacting with this video. Okay. All right. So let's look at the next one. What about a belated birthday card? Sorry I'm late. Happy belated birthday. Think about the audience for this. Think about the writer or the sender of this card. Think about what the context might be. Think about the purpose. Think about what message this is sending. Okay, here are some guys who are at a UK Wildcats game, and they're in their school colors, and they are supporting the Cats. Now think about The obvious message here, right, is that they support the Wildcats. But what other messages might they be sending by going to this extreme? By having their body painted. So think about this one. Okay, here's one. Think about this is a movie poster for the first Batman film in 1989, and I think it was 1989, pretty sure. I'm a big Batman fan, so Batman. I mean, I remember watching the movie in the theater in 1989, and I was born in Michigan, but I was living. Or I was born in Michigan, but I was visiting my grandpa who had moved to Kentucky after his retirement, and my aunt, who also lived in Kentucky, took us to see this. So I saw this right over in at Fugit Cinema in Hazard. I wasn't living here at the time, but I was staying in Jackson with my grandpa and my aunt. And I remember seeing it. So, and ever since then, I was hooked on Batman. Batman was my hero. But think about the fact that this advertisement, this poster for the movie, all it has is the bat symbol and the date. So think about what that is saying. What is, no other words on this except that. So what is that saying? All right. So this is a Confederate flag that someone has displayed on the outside of their home. With this one, what I want you to do is, as you're writing, think about what unintended message this might send and what intended messages it might send. And also think about this one. Think about this context. It is very different, I think, to display this flag now than it was even 5-10 years ago. And it is very different to display this flag now than it was in the 1800s, for example, right? Um, so think about that. Think about context and do a little bit of writing. All right. Also, let's think about this uh, sacred text. Now, this is the Holy Bible. This could be any text that is sacred to any religion, but this is the Bible. Think about the content of the Bible as having a message, but also think about the way this book looks. What message does the look of this book send? And this is a person who is carrying a Louis Vuitton bag or purse. I think it's maybe a bag. It looks like maybe it might have a laptop in it or something. It's awful big for a purse, but I don't know. Um, but this is Louis Vuitton. So you're out on the town running errands. You're carrying this bag. What message are you sending? And who is the audience for this? And how do you think the audience is responding? So some of these are not as it's not as easy, right? You don't really think of when you're carrying your purse or when you're carrying your bag, you don't really think of you arguing something by that and people being your audience. But Lunsford and Ruskiewicz thinks every they think that everything's an argument. And finally, here is here are some ladies outside of Hobby Lobby. Now, let me give you a little bit of context for this if you don't know. Along with the Affordable Care Act, which people like to call Obamacare, um, companies were required to provide insurance that included birth control. And David Green, the owner of the Hobby Lobby stores, did not want to require birth control, or did not want to have his company pay insurance for their employees that covered birth control, because birth control is not a part of his religious beliefs. So he didn't want his company to be required to provide insurance that covered birth control. So these are ladies who are outside boycotting Hobby Lobby. Think about what their message is. There's a very clear message in the pink sign: keep your theology off our biology. Boycott Hobby Lobby. So that is a message. Think about who the audience is. Who are these two ladies? The third one is in the back there. Who are they trying to reach? Who do they want to see these messages? And when we talked a little bit about the context, for this one as well. So write a little bit about this one. Okay, so here are the references to practical argument and everything's an argument that I used in this PowerPoint presentation. So what I would like for you to do, or I hope that you have really spent some time writing in your journal about each of these. If you have any questions about what an argument is, or if you have any questions about how each of these different arguments are in fact arguments, you can ask me. You can post in the questions discussion board. But until the next video, I will see you later. And if you have any questions, be sure to let me know.